Speaking of which, can I just plug? I'm finally finalizing it. The mikvah, the dunk, the ritual, the circumcision, the whole business is finally happening April 26th. You'll find this funny.
In Miami?
No. In Austin, I'm timing it with a crypto conference consensus. I'm gonna go hang out with the crypto bros, and then we're gonna get a little prick. There'll be a little blood, a little bit mikvah, a little Judaism, and boom, we're killing two very different birds with the same stone. April 26th in Austin, Texas.
Let's get this on camera. We should film Moment of Zen,
including the circumcision.
By the way, so this is, well, let's not go with too many details. Some people do it themselves. The really metal way of doing it is doing it yourself.
Please,
Jesus Christ.
Let's move to a new topic.
Everyone just cringes at once.
Welcome back to another episode of Moment of Zen. With returning guest Amjad Masad, we start this podcast by referencing my Cognitive Revolution AI podcast interview with the CEO of Replika, whose recent decision to turn off the erotic roleplay function caused uproar for male users, one of whom called the move something akin to a dying marriage where the partner refuses to have sex anymore. We then get into disenfranchised men more broadly, AI Doomerism, Effective Altruism, the new right, and more. So let's get into it. But first, let's hear from our sponsors.
SecureFrame is the leading all-in-one platform for security and privacy compliance. SecureFrame helps you get SOC 2 audit ready in weeks, not months, and it's used by thousands of companies like AngelList, Coda, and Remote. I believe in the company so much I invested in it, and I recommend it to all my portfolio companies. Sign up for a free demo at secureframe.com and mention Moment of Zen during your demo to get 20% off your first year of SecureFrame.
You know, I went to sign up for Replika because I had no idea what you were talking about, and it wanted to charge me $10 a month for like an e-girlfriend, and I felt so embarrassed. It felt like buying porn or something. I just refused to do it. So I'm gonna have to go into the conversation. Okay.
So I bought it, and it really sucks. I think Eric is in the group chat that I talked about it in, but basically, I downgraded my.
But Amjad, you actually have a wife. That's the thing. Your baseline is too high. You probably talk to a very normal, nice, attractive woman. That you may not be the target market for this, Amjad. Is the reality.
But I don't think it's even using LLMs. Like just from a pure technology perspective, it like literally sucks. Like I can build a better one on the weekend, and I thought about it because like they're making like what close to $1 billion. In revenue.
Oh my God.
It's 10 million subscribers paying $10 a year. That's $100, right? What's that? That's like $1 billion ARR, right?
That's insane. I wonder how much this is going to hurt their revenue. So flesh it out. You downgraded your view of humanity because you didn't think that there were so many men who were so desperate to need the shitty version.
Yes. The chatbot was so bad that someone getting any type of fulfillment of their like intimacy and intimate life from this crappy thing it caused a huge update in my mind about what I think about like the average individual, or maybe they're not average, and maybe this is so another view on this is maybe this is like actually prying on some part of society that we don't know much about, and maybe it's not part of my world model, maybe because these people are not out and about and actually I get to interact with them, and maybe that's like a good piece of data for me that, you know, there are people out there that are so lacking in any kind of human contact that anything that sort of it resembles any sort of like real contact or intimacy is actually compelling.
I think if I could maybe diagnose the problem, I see we're skipping ahead in our agenda, State of Men. I think here's the problem. And my
Yes.
one of my favorite writers, Michel Houellebecq, winner of the Prix Goncourt, by the way, I will mention in passing, more than one, wrote in his first book, Extension du domaine de la lutte, which is translated as whatever in English, I think, which is a terrible translation. But he basically predicted that as you created an open, basically transactional market in human relations, as there are in the economy, you would naturally have some men that would draw all the attention and some who wouldn't at all. He basically predicted incels is what he did, like in the 90s. And so what you're seeing is I think the inevitable outcome of that process, Amjad. And this is technology filling in the gaps for where society has sort of failed.
So what you're saying is because the sexual market is liberalized, it's sort of extreme winners and extreme losers.
Basically, we've created a marketplace. I hate using it as a marketplace because in some sense we're conceding the point, but in which certain alpha males succeed and everybody else fails. Yes, correct.
So society, by saying that society failed them, it's implying that society should somehow regulate this.
I don't personally believe that, but I think Ross Douthat, who's a New York Times columnist and safely within the Overton window, I'll mention in passing, did mention, how did he phrase it? Something about marriage being, or monogamy being, what term did he use? It was a little bit spicy. Yeah.
So I remember Jordan Peterson said enforced monogamy. It's one of the things that he got canceled for. Which is like not the government mandating monogamy, but actually like the sort of society
cultural expectation,
putting a huge cultural penalty to polygamy. And now that the cultural penalty is gone, it sort of you have like any sort of free market dynamic end up looking like a power law or a Pareto distribution. And therefore they're like a really long tail of losers and a very small minority of extreme winners. Dan or Eric, do you believe in forced monogamy, or that the society should do that?
Well, the stats bear out what you're saying. There were stats that going around on Twitter yesterday saying 60% of women ages 18 to 29 are in a relationship with a man, and 30% of men ages 18 to 29 are in a relationship with women. So either women are just all dating older, and there are multiple women per top men.
And I wonder, it doesn't say anything about cheating, right? I wonder how many of the women that are are also cheating with the top men.
Well, one thing that's also, even before monogamy, is this kind of just idea of encouraging marriage, of encouraging just partnering, and that's one version of enforcing monogamy or encouraging monogamy. But I don't think monogamy really serves the woman. Is the question? Antonio, you're laughing.
You don't think monogamy serves women? What do you mean by
that? Sorry. I don't think not having monogamy serves. I don't think what we have right now serves women, even though it's in the name of women. Louise Perry has a popular book right now, Against the Sexual Revolution, where she's arguing that what was that sexual liberation, while done in the name of feminism, actually set women back, in that it was harder. This is her argument. It's harder for women to find a good man because men have, the power in the sexual marketplace. The best men, at least, they don't have to settle down.
But that didn't change the quality of men. So, like, I think in some ways that argument doesn't make sense, because people were then settling before, but it was just because of a more cultural norm. Like, to back to Amjad's point, I think this is all rooted in the fact that if you don't have, I don't know, a bunch of education, or you're an entrepreneur, or you basically succeed in capitalism as a man today, your options suck compared to where they were 70 years ago, right? Post-war, you could have a high school level education, more or less, get a job at your local factory. There was civil society, the civic organizations that were associated with that. You get married, have kids, then you get a pension, and like there's like a fulfilling existence. Take any town in the Midwest that used to have that factory that doesn't have it now, and basically all you have is fentanyl, and talented people end up moving to major cities, where they then go get the education and work in these high paying knowledge worker jobs. Like, I think that's the root cause of it. Is what do you do if you're 18 or 20 and all you have is your kind of physicality? Traditionally, we had war for that. We don't have that anymore. I mean, at least in the U.S. What are you supposed to do? Yeah, exactly. You smoke weed and play Call of Duty. Like what are you reasonably supposed to do? And any version of it is, oh, well, we just need to get these people to go to college is just like a completely asinine, unrealistic point of view. Like that they're just not going to go to college. Like what those people need are some version of a job that is fulfilling, that gives them some level of status in their community. And we as a society have devalued that through kind of the endless HRification of everything, basically.
Well, even the college track has become somewhat less welcoming to a lot of groups of men. I think now 60% of college graduates are women.
Yep.
And if you look at the graphs, the woman is climbing up, which is great, but the men graduating is actually going down over time. And I think in the US, especially in an effort to boost women inclusion in education, I think they have done a poor job at keeping men engaged and interested in that track. But that is not to say that it's actually the best track and that it's actually like a good thing for everyone to go to college. Education is obviously good, but there are different ways of doing education, especially now with AI and what's happening in AI. It's clear that there are some jobs that are actually better tracks for quality of life and long term earning than knowledge work, and primarily I think trade type work. Perhaps being a plumber is now more protected from disruption than being a lawyer. I don't know if you know, but there's this OpenAI funded startup that's like building an AI lawyer, and people saying that's I haven't read too much into it, but people are saying that they're already deploying it and it's quite compelling product. And that's just one job. We know ChatGPT kind of passed the medical examination, and these things we're just in the early innings of it. And so it might actually be rational to actually go into different tracks of education to actually do something that's going to be more meaningful contribution to society, or something that we would need in a post sort of AI disruption.
Amjad, even we might be disrupted. When ChatGPT came out, I actually entered, what does the future of Web3 marketing look like? And it more or less pooped out like Spindle's high-level pitch. And I was so, I felt so made obsolete. If they could just like yell at engineers and then do pitch meetings, that's it. I'm out of a job, basically. But no, it actually did. It actually did output, or podcasting, for example. Yeah.
It could do this podcast for us. So listen, I just want to go back to the ethics of enforced monogamy versus full free markets, free marketplace for sexual dynamics. What's interesting is that sort of like ethical question matches capitalism as well, and matches just the free market in general. So if you equalize, you actually encroach on people's freedoms, but you create an underclass. If you maximally liberalize, you create huge winners, but you also support a lot more individual freedom and equality of opportunity. And so that's the fundamental trade-off, I think, for society in general, whether it is mating or just living and like making a living.
And that was fair pushback to Jordan Peterson, Joe Rogan on the Joe Rogan podcast. He said, "Hey, if you're, so forgiving of inequality in the free market, and you just harp on, hey, the world's unequal, why aren't you more forgiving of inequality in this area as well?" But the reverse holds true. Like, you would think that one should be consistent on your view of egalitarianism.
Well, I think part of the problem is that you can remedy, wealth inequality through various welfare programs. But if you're trying to remedy what effectively devolves to sexual access inequality, then what is there going to be sexual welfare as well? Like that's there's not much you can actually do about it at the end of the day, right? Other than enforcing.
Well, you haven't played with Replika.
Yeah.
That's the UBI.
Yeah.
The no, not you don't force, but you have a cultural expectation. I guess you could do it indirectly by just encouraging marriage.
Well, I mean, there are countries in the world that this does exist, like
Right.
theocracies like do exist, and like
You don't have to go that far.
it's against the law to have liberalized sexual relations and such. So like I don't know. I think like the enforced monogamy is an interesting like thought experiment, but I don't see much practicality of it. I think it's like the root cause is like how can you increase status in society for people that aren't necessarily going to play this, extreme outlier knowledge work game, and how can we get back to a little bit more of call it the 1950s, still plenty of problems, but if you didn't have some fancy education, like you could still have a pretty meaningful economic existence and have level of status in your society. It's like
so you're saying it's a sort of beyond the pale to try to do anything, or it's not practical, or perhaps super unethical, gets into weird territory to try to do anything about equalizing the mating marketplace. Unlike wealth, which we know how to do with taxing, whatever. I wonder if pre-income tax United States would have thought the same, right? Like now we live in a world where like taxation is such a standard way of doing things, but there was a time when America was like a lot more libertarian, and the idea of the government kind of like really getting a big portion of your income was probably unthinkable. But we're in this world where it's so obvious that you should take people's money. You should confiscate people's money to redistribute it. But like if you think about it from first principles, why is that worse than confiscating people's sexual freedom?
So I was going to say, well, yeah, that question's unanswerable, Amjad. I was just going to observe, because one of the other squares on the MLZ bingo card is measuring Israel. So if you were to look at one Western country where marriage rates have stayed high, is Israel. And I think what's going on there is not necessarily any sort of welfare program, obviously. I think it's also postponed adulthood as part of this, right? Like adultolescence, the idea that you live like an adolescent through your 30s, which, by the way, I was at least partly guilty of, to be clear, is definitely part of it. And like, there's no enforced marriage in Israel, obviously. In the sort of conservative Jewish communities, that's a minority of the population. It's the fact that you're shipped off to war at 18, right? And you come back a man, like it or not, when you're 20, 21, and you assume a man's responsibilities with his wife, children, job, all the rest of it. You can't sort of just dabble around in adolescence forever. You just cannot, right? And I think there's nothing pushing us to do that, to assume the responsibilities of sort of historical adulthood in the form of either war or anything else. In Israel, they do have it because they're in a state of perpetual war, but here we don't. And that's something you could enforce. But
okay. I think there's something to that, Antonio, in the sense of kids being the kind of flip for most people in terms of maturity. Like what was that? Justin Murphy had that tweet recently where it showed him like he had been partying all night on drugs and wearing underwear outside, smoking a cigarette, and then now it's like him with his kid. And then he had that other Cope tweet of like how hard it was being a parent, and like, okay, yeah, anyone who's a parent, like it's just part of doing that. But there is also it's like time to put away childish things. But if the average age of when people are having kids is 35 plus, is going to have an impact on society. Where I don't know, maybe if people started having kids at 25, there would be a little bit more adult perspective on a lot of things, rather than sitting at home smoking weed and playing Call of Duty.
I think I read somewhere that you don't really know what life is until you've buried a parent and birthed a child, right? Then you see the true recursion that is life, and you kind of need the and of those two. And if you don't have the kid, you kind of don't really know what it is. Yeah.
What I take away from this is that like trying to solve cultural problems with policy is probably wrong and bad and leads you to all sorts of weird outcomes. But how do you solve cultural problems? How do you fix the culture? Maybe it requires some multi-decade or multi-lifetime effort to actually undo some cultural decay or any perceived cultural decay. But it's very tempting to try to enact policies. And one classic libertarian book called Economics in One Lesson basically talks about how the one lesson of economics is that there's always second order effects. And it talks about how the main thing that politicians miss, or maybe intentionally obfuscate, is that for any given policy that sounds good, we don't actually think about the second order effects. Like, Thomas Sowell, sort of famously talked about how the welfare state increased sort of single mother homes. I don't know how true that claim is, but he's very smart, makes a very compelling argument. But there's a lot of like these cases of second order effects, and it's really hard to think of one sort of economic or government policy that doesn't have negative second order effects. Maybe things that you can actually measure to be net positive over time, but like increasing the minimum wage has negative consequences of actually pricing some people out of the labor market. It increases automation, and in the long term loses more jobs. And so it's actually incredibly hard to create policy. It requires a lot of foresight and perhaps a lot of iteration over time to create policy, and incredibly so when it is actually at bottom not a sort of a policy situation. It's more of a cultural operating system that actually you need to change.
Well, I have one example. I'm generally very pro or anti-government regulation. I agree with that from a point of view, but the book How Asia Works is a good example of you take Taiwan, Japan, and Korea post-war and compare them to some of the other Asian countries post-war. And they all basically did the same thing, where they did kind of private land reform and essentially encouraged entrepreneurship at the most small level from a farmer standpoint. And yield started to go up because now people basically, they had an incentive to work harder on their farms so that they could sell the extra produce to then kind of work their way up the economic ladder. And then the book talks through a couple of other things that they did on that side. But I think like if I was to have an example of like good government regulation, it's the kind of like Asian economic miracle that happened in those three countries. But outside of that, I don't think your culture is your destiny, and the economic policies and regulations that you're going to put in place. I mean, this is the famous line of, if you take, any two countries, Japan and Norway and Haiti, Mexico and, Great Britain, and you just swapped the people in those countries, like physically from a land standpoint, to take the like anti-Xi handstand, like the geography is not going to be the destiny there. That group of people and the human capital is going to have a pretty big impact on the outcome.
It's to build on Amjad's point. It's possible that cultural problems require cultural solutions, and to build on the out of wedlock kind of rates that, or the single motherhood across all races has grown and has grown significantly since the 60s. And Charles Murray's argument is that it's because we've stopped shaming people who do it.
Charles Murray, who's that?
Coming Apart is his a non-controversial book, and highly cited, and it talks about how basically there's this trade where if you're an individual who's has a tough situation, it sucks to be shamed, and so out of respect for the individual, we stop doing that. But sometimes that's a conflict with the collective. A society that's too many out of wedlock mothers doesn't do it as well as a society that has stable two-parent households across all populations. And so that's possible that it requires cultural solutions.
By the way, you see it a lot in companies, like this idea of like what's good for the individual is like bad for the collective, or vice versa. You, as a CEO, especially as you're growing a company, you're having to make that assessment, like perhaps on a daily basis. There are a lot of people that are really good people that end up in positions where like they're not scaling. And the change that you're going to make is going to be usually damaging psychologically to them, but it's like better for the organization. Sometimes not entirely. Sometimes you'll find a place for them in the organization where they're going to be happy and more productive. But a lot of times they're going to see it as a demotion, or they're not going to be happy with it because they lost face or something like that. And but ultimately, you got to maximize shareholder value.
As we always say here at Moment of Zen. I want to quickly level set with the audience, because some people might be wondering, who are newer to these topics. Hey, why do we, how do we reconcile that men are the most powerful people in the world with, hey, we should start caring about men? And for people who are unaware, men are at both extremes. Men are the highest earning CEOs and highest earning people in general. They're also a majority of homelessness. Homeless people are men. Majority of suicides are men. Majority of people get murdered are men. Majority of people who are in jail are men. Men are also in the worst position as well. And people also might be wondering, why do we care that men and women aren't getting married or aren't having kids? And it's because of what we've been talking about in previous episodes about Peter Zeihan. We have a huge population. We're underpopulated. We're not at replacement rate, and we need to have more kids. And so what are the ways that we're going to have more kids? Either we have to have better men, as Dan suggests. Men have to be better than women, but that is at odds with our female empowerment.
No, I didn't say better than women. I think it's just we need to have other alternatives for men who don't want to follow the extreme outlier knowledge work.
Hear me out. Right now, I would posit that the problem is, so we're not having enough. There's too many single women who don't want the men that are available because they're not at their education level or employment level or whatever. And women tend not to date down, right? So either the men have to surpass them, or women have to lower their standards, or we have to have some other, like women have to not need men and have artificial wombs, and men have replicas, or there's polyamory, right? Like these are the only 4 logical solutions that I see. Do you see any other logical solutions? And which do you think is most feasible?
Yeah, so I shared in the chat. I think this website is one of the best single page websites on the internet. What the fuck happened in 1971? But on this site, amongst a whole bunch of other things, is if you look at the deviation between average male earnings and female earnings, I think it's a pretty stark chart. And I don't know. I go back to is if people feel like they're not, Maslow's hierarchy of needs. If you're starting to feel like you're kind of meeting certain levels of needs and thriving in certain levels of fulfillment, that's going to have a material impact on your confidence, who you are, your behavior, and your attractiveness in the marketplace. Whether people want to give a whole bunch of other projection reasons why, if basically you have a stable income and kind of like your life kind of put together, I think you become a more attractive option in the marketplace. And so I think that is the root of this issue. And until we solve for this, and more college is not the answer, I don't think there's a solution.
I'm looking at the site. It's funny. Everything went to shit in 1971, according to the site. And I always assumed that the last good year was 1964. I might have to update my prior. I guess it really went to shit with 1971. Who was in office? Oh, Nixon. Yeah.
So there's the Nixon shock, right? I think a lot of Bitcoiners are really big fan of that solution to the question, what the fuck happened in 1971, which is we officially went off the gold standard. So the US dollar became officially a fiat currency. And it was actually supposed to be a temporary measure. But last show we talked about things that are conspiracies and a lot of things in history. This started as sort of a conspiracy. They went to some elite conference somewhere, and they decided that they're going to change the world, basically, and the world changed that year. I don't know if all these things. Bitcoiners really make a good argument for how almost everything in culture and the economy is downstream from that particular decision. like basically the idea behind it is goes to something called the time preference. So it's this Austrian economics concept where high time preference means that you prefer gratification, you prefer pleasure today, and you discount the future heavily. So pleasure in the future is heavily discounted the higher time preference you have. Low time preference, you actually discount the future way less. So having low time preference is good because you're investing more. You're investing in yourself. You're delaying gratification. You're investing actual money into businesses, and you're building. Hans Hermann Hoppe, I think, called it the process of civilization. This is how civilization is built, is by having low time preference, because we prefer the future. When Europeans built these multi-100-year cathedrals, that's incredibly low time preference, because you're not going to even see it in your lifetime. You're starting a project that's going to be seen by your grand, or experienced by your grand descendants. And so what the Austrians think is that the fiat currency actually promotes high time preference, because it promotes less investments and more spending, because it's much better for you to spend, because the currency is going to get inflated away and your wealth is going to get inflated away. And therefore you're raising everyone's time preference. And by raising everyone's time preference, like, who has the most time preference? It's like a baby. The baby is like a pleasure seeking thing, or an animal, right? That doesn't have concept of really valuing future things. And so you have a society that approaching the levels of gratification of a child, and that has all sorts of negative effects. For example, having children is not a high time preference. It's not a low time preference thing. It's not a high time preference thing. To have a child is to invest for many years and decades into this being that's not going to be producing a lot for a long time, or being a good positive impact on society for a long time. And so you just have to sacrifice a lot to see anything that comes out of that investment. And so the Austrians think that that's really literally what happened in 1971, literally that year. And they make a convincing argument. I think that's the best solutions I've heard to that problem.
Related to that, just to add a little bit of spice to the podcast, the Amy Chua book, The Triple Package. One of the things that's kind of an undercurrent, and she identifies, she's the Yale Law professor who came up with the term Tiger Mom, or popularized it. And she wrote a book about immigrant groups in the United States that are successful. And she cites Chinese, Jewish, Indian, Iranian, Lebanese, Nigerian, Cuban exiles, two of whom are on here, and Mormons as these kind of outlier groups. And if you look at all of them, they tend to have very, very low time preference on what they're approaching culturally. And I don't know. I think it's also the thing that didn't replicate, but people love to cite anyways, is the marshmallow test. For those on the podcast who don't know, there is a Stanford study where they put kids in a room and they had a marshmallow on a table. And they said, if the marshmallow is still here when we come back, I'll give you a second marshmallow. It sounds like that study didn't replicate, but from a kind of intellectual standpoint, makes sense, right? So the kid who can hold off and understand the concept of, if I wait 5 minutes, I get 2 marshmallows, is the same kid who realizes studying in school is going to pay off later instead of going to party, saving for investment, et cetera, et cetera. But I do think time preference is probably something that is also an American culture thing that has degraded over time, and maybe because of fiat money. But yeah, I don't know. I think it's all, the root is economics, Eric. It is not cultural. I don't think American culture has changed that much. And I think the economic model of the country has changed, in the sense that if you're on the kind of lower end, there are really no reasonable opportunities. And I guess you could argue post-war, it's like, yeah, the rest of the world was shit. So we did have all these factory jobs because everything else had been bombed. But I don't know. I feel like there's a little bit more of a middle way. in that we could figure out ways to make it so that if you live in Akron, Ohio, like there's a reasonable path for you to have some level of fulfillment if you don't have a fancy college degree.
It's interesting. It's a lot of things. I mean, women entering the workforce en masse, and that change took a while to happen. But it turns out that women are, the median woman might be better than the median man at certainly at school, and that took a few decades to play out, and other things as well. Combined with, I mean, you can't say dating apps didn't change how people date, how people match. Just that kind of the economics of that market, and then the culture evolved alongside it. But yeah, I think it's a number of different factors. One thing I just want to comment that 3 years ago, this conversation would have been outside of the Overton window. But what happened is there are people like Richard Reeves, who wrote a book of Boys and Men, or Nicholas Eberstadt wrote a book, Men at Work. Some academics have kind of sort of cross the quote unquote the 4-minute mile, so to speak, metaphorically, where it's okay to acknowledge men as a victim group, or that's what they're trying, or underachieving men. And you see two reactions to that. Some are saying, yeah, just like every other victim group that's clearly been struggling, we should strive for certain equality for that group. And other group, and Dan and I and Amjad and I saw this at a retreat we once did, where we saw reactions, are kind of disgusted with these people and just say, hey, tough it up, get better, it's your fault. And it's interesting to see just the contra reactions to this group.
I think that there's also just some revealed preferences that we've found through some of these apps. For example, like dating apps, as you brought up, I'll put in the show notes the classic example of so women set height preferences in the dating apps. And if you look at the distribution of male height versus the distribution of what women put in dating apps, there's a huge, and I'm 5'11", so I never made the dating apps. I got in a relationship before that, but I would have been cut off from this because I didn't make the 6-foot cutoff. And so there's it's not even like a normal distribution. It just gets completely dropped
it's
off.
6 feet, because it's funny. We were having this conversation earlier. There's a remote employee that we're having fly in, and I just made the joke, oh, for all we know, the guy is 7'2". And then we all spent the next 5 minutes wasting time trying to guess the guy's height. And he wouldn't tell us. And then it came down to the dating cutoff. I thought it was 5'10". 6 is a pretty high cutoff, I have to say.
Yeah, it's 6 foot.
Right. But so then people are like, oh, there are not enough good men. And it's like, well, maybe if you increased your height preference to a little bit more of the distribution of actual heights in the world, then you could be potentially matching with some more people. But it's a more of a joke to point out. But I do think that some of the things that we have in society are not helping, right? So in a more traditional situation, there are other ways of meeting people that aren't app-based. And so the app algorithm being the primary matchmaker for a large percentage of relationships today, if that's the case, I actually would want to see the stats on what percentage of relationships over a year are a result of some version of an online app. But if that algorithm benefits, a certain group of males or females, either or, it's going to have a pretty big impact on society, right?
Pity the poor 5'10" Americans. Can I comment on, now that we've introduced the ghost of Amy Chu into the group, can I comment on the other two things of her little triad thing in her book? Are we going off script a little bit too much?
Yes.
But she's been canceled multiple times, right? Because she said hard work is good, and immigrants work harder. And
yeah, well, I mean, so of course Cuban exiles are in the successful list there. One thing, definitely growing up in a Cuban exile family, I definitely felt the first two things, which is a sense of superiority combined with insecurity, which is this weird toxic cocktail in which you feel you're better than everyone around you, but there's this gnawing anxiety about proving it some way. And that was absolutely the case that Miami Cubans were sort of perceive themselves in the whole Miami stew. I could some countless anecdotal examples of perceptions my parents had in which it's oh, look at these barbarians we're surrounded by, but by the way, we also have to show it. There's this deep gnawing anxiety that they wouldn't understand. A friend of ours would probably call it group narcissism, right? That this group sort of had. So I think those two elements, at least of her little triple, in my personal experience, are very correct.
Antonio, why don't you introduce the group narcissism concept a little bit?
I might piss off the person who introduced this concept to
Wow, I'm settling in for this
Okay,
explanation.
well, all right. So, okay, so the the book in question, which is unsurprisingly out of print, is called the Ordeal of Civility by Kaduhi, C-I. I always misspell it. I think 2 Ds, U-H-I. Oh man, where to start? The theory is that Jews in Europe in the 19th century felt this deep gnawing anxiety around getting along with the Protestant Germans, that it created this massive neuroses. I didn't even couldn't follow the entire argument, and that's much of what led to, the presence of Freudianism and this notion of group narcissism. In other words, that you're narcissistic about how your group is perceived by the majority. And I think in one interpretation of this, which is the one that we were exposed with and discussed, a lot of the group belonging in the United States is Kaduhian group narcissism, which I think is partially true. I think it's definitely the case that, let's just be blunt. People I've ganged up on the Latinx people, for example, right? Who, by the way, if you parachuted them in Latin America, would stick out as like a sore thumb as much as any like ugly Americans. They don't speak Spanish. They don't actually have elements of Hispanic culture. Why do they identify so much with this Latinx thing? Well, precisely those who, in fact, are more legitimately Latin, Hispanic American, don't have this group narcissism around it. This is where I think the theory blows up. The thought that any sort of group allegiance necessarily is an expression of narcissism, I don't actually agree with. And I think speaking of narcissism, Kaduhi himself was actually born a Scotch, I think, Catholic, and clearly wanted to integrate with Protestant America. And so he rejected any outgroup that sort of didn't assimilate. I think if there's one thing you can look at the United States, right, that's different from 19th century Germany, is that you can live, for example, as a Jew in the United States and not feel self-conscious about it and not feel that you have to fit in with some broader world, right? And so, that's this group narcissism concept that I have some objections to.
Yeah, I wonder how much when people try to look at sociology and try to explain it with culture and with environment, they leave out the genetics and and so for example, like I think it's been proven that groups with a lot of inbreeding are more sort of in-group oriented, and where they favor people in the group, they favor kinship a lot more. They are and they're less universal, whereas people who actually did not do a lot of inbreeding, actually breeded widely with a lot of different groups, put less on kinship, and are perhaps like more universal in their views. That's partly, I think, why white Europeans innovated this concept of liberalism and neoliberalism, is because there's actually a very weird, there's I think the book that's favorite on this podcast, Weird. It's a very weird thing to actually for a group to be very obsessed with the success of other groups, whether that actually resulted in good things or not, is besides the point. But but I think these kind of explanations are, to me, much more interesting than pure psychological speculation, because at least there's some interesting logic behind them, which is why I initially, was when I was first introduced to Zihan, which we criticize a bunch the other day, but was attracted to some of these arguments because I think arguments with logic are much more interesting about explaining our world than sort of just stories about psychology of a certain group, which nobody can actually provide any evidence for.
I don't know. I when I have more time, when I'm not working full time, I really want to go deep on this topic. But I was recently reading this book called The Restless Republic, which is like a snapshot of a 10-year period in England after they beheaded Charles I and the Commonwealth, Oliver Cromwell, and the like crazy Protestants who are running around the country doing shit. I actually just think Protestantism, and I have to be careful, I think it's just like this crazy viral strain of Christianity that has just gone amok. And I mean, we've talked about it with Dominion and just I think Antonio, last time we were talking about this, but I think Protestantism is just crazy, batshit crazy stuff that has pushed into the Western mindset and kind of just keeps running. And people are worried about AGI, and it's like we already have Protestantism, and in terms of a thing that we need to figure out what is a cultural force against that, right? Is it Catholicism? Is it Islam? I don't know.
Judaism.
Yeah,
I think Judeo-Christianity is also on the bingo card, so I just wanted to get that one out of the way for those who are playing. Yeah.
Should we segue into Big Yud, into Doomerism?
Okay, can I get a beer first? Sorry, I'm going to have to self-medicate for this one. Also, it might spice things up. I'll be back in a second.
You guys got a beer.
Oh, man. I need something harder than a beer.
One thing I want to say.
I'm ready for Big Yud, AGI, Doomerism, EA, polycules, the whole fucking thing. Yeah, let's talk about religion for nerds and the Pope of the nerds. Let's talk about the Pope of the nerds.
Well, actually, that's an interesting segue from the problem of sort of underachieving men. Is that there's like I mean, like I don't mean it in an insulting way, but like I think a lot of fringe ideologies and cults and things like that end up having those kind of men. Like the 4chans of the world, for example, is a great example of that. Maybe it's not a cult, but they have a lot of in-group language. They created a certain ideology with a very sort of black and white view of the world. I don't think that rationalists are similar to 4chan, but I do think they attract a similar kind of like disenfranchised person to a certain like worldview that's quite nihilistic and perhaps unrealistic. And that is not to say that their main philosophers or authors are totally deranged or unrealistic, but for example, I'm a huge fan of Nick Bostrom, and a lot of people that are adjacent to that groups have produced amazing intellectual output that I've read and I continue to read, and I think very compelling. I think some worry about some kind of AI alignment is warranted, in the same way that we worry about capitalism alignment, right? Any sort of large optimization force that is hard to understand, like we talked about, the second order problem of economics is incredibly hard to understand. And just thinking through how do you align economics with the better benefit of humanity is a really good question. And that's a question of government and governance. And now we have a new optimization force, which is namely gradient descent, that produces AI. And so for people who do not know, the way AI works is that it is trained using a mathematical process that discovers algorithms. Like, just let me pause on that. It actually discovers algorithms. The way AI works is a machine learning training system that finds algorithms to do a certain function. So instead of software engineers sitting down and writing code, it is actually discovering that code. And it does so in a way where it discovers code that we could never write. It discovers algorithms that are superhuman in nature. But it is a process that we don't fully understand because it relies on amounts of data that no one person could read or consume. It relies on values and numbers and huge matrices of values that we can't really interpret. So we can't read the code that is underlying those algorithms that the machine learning model has sort of discovered. And so, yes, you have to worry about like what is the outcome of these machine learning models. but they make a huge leap, and then they created a cult around it. And this cult has all aspects of cultishism, and they have a whole like end of world scenario, and they're very aggressive towards anyone who doesn't view the world the way they view it. They will call you a murderer, and they will call you all sorts of names if you don't believe in their mountain of crap, or don't believe fully in their mountain of crap. And so not I wouldn't want to throw away the baby with the water, because I think they created enormous intellectual output that I really respect, and I think they contributed something to the world. But at the same time, like they also created like a militant group of people that is probably not going to end well.
So I think we agree, Amjad, that like the rationalist movement is a little bit of like a pseudo religion, and at some point you should mature and get past it. And a lot of people get stuck there in like the local minima, and then that's it, right? Is that
Amjad? You actually had a good quip in our group chat. You were saying there's been a progression from like the new atheists to social justice to effective altruists to AI safety. Why don't you unpack that a little bit?
Yeah. So basically, new atheists were this movement that really picked up post 9/11, where Sam Harris and a bunch of people like that start talking about the problem of Islam and how religion is this dangerous force in the world. And it sort of pattern matches a lot of the AI stuff in that it was like very intellectually interesting, because Sam Harris is trying to sort of psychoanalyze and understand the incentives of people who believe in religion. It was also intellectually stimulating because you're engaging in this very puzzle-like debates and arguments where the atheists, the four horsemen of atheism, Sam Harris and Daniel Dennett and Richard Dawkins, they would go around, they debate people who are like fairly intellectual on the sort of Christian and sort of Muslim side, and it is very entertaining to watch. And they present a lot of logical arguments for the presence of God and for the lack thereof, and I've watched a lot of this stuff, and I'm like a big fan of some of their writings. Obviously, earlier Richard Dawkins, The Selfish Gene. I also like that British guy. I forgot his name. Christopher Hitchens. And Christopher Hitchens was doing it for the sport. He liked to get drunk and just talk. But Sam Harris is actually like quite militant atheist, and that mentality was attracted a lot of sort of what we're talking about earlier, sort of disenfranchised men, people who did not have sort of any life and didn't have anything to do, and they would go online and just argue forever and attack people, and they became like very anti anyone who doesn't think like them. So then, for whatever reason, they ran out of steam. It became passé. We were starting to see that pure atheistic obsession also has problems, and society overall, pivoted back to potentially being more neutral on religion. People stopped freaking about Islam, and how Islam is like this especially bad religion that like causes people to go insane and kill people. And they just like became boring, and so people started migrating from atheism or new atheism to social justice. So you had the rise of the feminist blogs, you had the rise of all sorts of blogs talking about using similar arguments to New Atheism to talk about how society is very discriminated against one group or another, how there's like a dominant group, namely like straight white men, and how they go around and dominate people, and how everything in life is sort of biased against a certain group of people towards another group of people. And look, all these things, including New Atheism, they always start with some kernel of truth, and they just become deranged over time. And they all share the same characteristic, where they also become sort of insanely militant, and they start attacking anyone who doesn't exactly believe like them. Now, we all know that social justice warriors kind of had their like big peak in perhaps like 2013 to 2015. You could probably find it in Google Trends. These things kind of look like bubbles. And then for a while, like, it was kind of quiet, and we didn't have so exactly, the bubble for like social justice is November 2016.
What else happened in November
and
2016,
that
by the way?
happens to be,
Oh, no.
Trump got in office. So basically, that starts to fade away. It becomes lame. You don't have a lot of status by doing that. And then you had the effective altruism movement gain a lot of steam. So effective altruism also uses a lot of intellectual arguments, and it is another thing that you could feel better than other people. So New Atheists are better than other people because you're rational, and you don't believe in God, and you believe in humanity. You're pro-humanity. Whatever arguments you're gonna paint yourself as a good thing, better than anyone. And then you had social justice, and how you're like for the oppressed and against the oppression. And then EA was like effective altruism. From the name, I am like a better altruist than anyone else. I know how to run the world, and to maximize utility. They're utilitarian. Basically, they think that there's a way to, initially started as a way to spend money, but there's a way to live your life that actually maximizes happiness across the world. And Slater Star Codex wrote this blog about the migration from New Atheism to social justice, and he showed some real argument, some evidence showing that some of the same people that were militant New Atheists became militant feminists and social justice warriors, and I bet those same people became militant effective altruists. And now I think we're seeing another shift from the effective altruism to AI safety, and the idea that AI will kill the world. And it's also built on all these things share this thing where they're very fun to think about. You can build a mountain of intellectual arguments that you can use to attack the opposing view and feel better. And my prediction is that AI safety over this decade is going to take the same direction as social justice did, and probably become sort of a national thing, and in a national cult.
One thing I'll just mention on the New Atheist. By the way, you glossed over Richard Dawkins' real claim to fame is that in Selfish Gene, he coined the term meme, actually, in a very different context than we typically use it. But the idea, the original meaning for it there was like this atomic unit of meaning that would self-replicate through the genome that he used in like genetic patterns, which became what we know now. I think the other thing that's worth mentioning, right, is like the New Atheists came at a time when, one, there was the external threat of Islam. So Sam Harris at the time got into a lot of trouble for the, his, and also Hitchens for the God is not good, sort of anti sort of Muslim side of what they're doing. But at the same time, remember, Protestant evangelicals used to be a political force, right? So a lot of the presence of religion in American public life, which basically doesn't exist anymore, was back in the day when like what happened at the Southern Baptist Conference used to be a matter of national import because they would endorse one president or another. That's all gone away, but it was partially in response to that. I mean, it's interesting that you're drawing a line between the New Atheism and the social justice and the rationalism. I definitely get it between the rationalism and the New Atheism. again, to me, it's all Protestantism in the sense that it's this crusading, millenarian, apocalypticist, improve the world thing about it.
Well, Antonio, in the early days of social justice, it was like I know that it ended up being in this very sort of irrationalist sort of insanity that doesn't even try to be rational. But in the very early days, they were actually trying to, build sort of a rational edifice of how their worldview is better than others, and they actually used a lot of the rationality type argument. It sort of ended up morphing into wokeism, which is a totally different thing that also came from a different tradition that is totally not rationalist tradition, which is the postmodernist type tradition. Ended up merging together, and now they have like this new branch. But there is a branch from New Atheism through social justice to rationalists.
Eric, when are we going to get an EA punching bag? Because I have like a whole anti-EA screed raring to go, and we just need the foil for that. When are we going to get Big Yud? Come on, Eric, your powers of persuasion can do it. Let's get Big Yud.
Well, let's tempt him. Why don't you give a preview of your anti-EA screed?
I don't know if I want to bore. Everyone's going to go to sleep. I mean, it's just it's not necessarily EA. It's more EA to me is really a demographic that believes in utilitarianism and consequentialism, right? So my objections to EA are basically objections to utilitarianism, which is that, so EA is a demo. It's bizarre. It's a Western wealthy person thing where it's like, oh, where do I basically what sort of indulgence do I buy? Like, tell me, what do I buy? Is it mosquito nets or is it vaccinations? What do I buy to presumably increase value? And then sort of like, what restrictions do I put on myself in terms of carbon footprint or whatever? It really is a pseudo-religious movement. So, but let's just leave that aside in utilitarianism. What's wrong with it? What's the problem with ethics by Excel spreadsheet, right? Like, well, why can't you just add up the hedons, right? And the hedons and the dolors, I think, was Bentham's original term for the sort of positive and the negative that you add up, and that determines any public policy. Well, for starters, you can't actually measure these things necessarily, right? Like in the micro thing of like, oh, on that street corner, do I build a school or an office building or an apartment complex? Sure, of course you can trade off things in a very micro way, right? Like in a very microeconomic sort of way, what's good. But the reality is for most of the things that we actually spend time talking about as moral discourse, there is no math you can apply that gives you a concrete answer. The math doesn't actually necessarily work out. And even if it did, the reality is that the math leads to many repugnant conclusions, which is a term of art inside ethics of like, what happens if you run the math in what seems like an absurd way, but it's like, well, but it's not absurd, right? If the math is in fact the moral philosopher and you can force the math to do crazy things, one of the classic examples is, well, wouldn't you prefer a world in which everyone has an iota of pleasure, but there's a trillion humans, to the one where there's 7 billion humans, but it's a very mixed bag of pleasure versus pain? Wouldn't you prefer that world? A slightly more grotesque example is, why don't we take a newborn and harvest them for organs and save half a dozen lives, right? If you're not doing it, you're basically killing 6 people. You can set up all sorts of arrangements in which you get to these drastic things. It's like, well, come on, Antonio, but that's crazy. It's like, well, what is crazy about it? I mean, the math works out. Why wouldn't you do it? The problem with ethics by Excel spreadsheet is that at some point you need the moral infinities that you put into the spreadsheet. Why don't you dice up the newborn and harvest them for organs? Well, because Judaism says that they have a Selam Elohim, they're made in the image of God, or Christianity says they're made in the image of God, or secular liberalism says, oh, they have human rights, which is just 3 different ways of saying the exact same thing, right? Which is humans are special somehow in God's creation, and we can't just rob them of life for the sake of some other human, even if the math works out, right? So where do you draw those moral infinities from? Nothing in consequentialism, Mill, Bentham, they're not going to tell you what those moral infinities are, right? And that's fundamentally the problem, right? Like the whole SBF blow up. Finally, these EA people have finally shut the fuck up because you can see what the outcome of EA is in the context of FTX and SBF, in which he's basically robbing people blind for $10 billion. But if he actually saved enough people, would it be worthwhile? That's one question we're not asking. Like, was that the calculus going on in SBF's head? And if so, was he wrong? What if he had gotten away with it? What if the crypto markets hadn't tanked in 2022 and he made a bunch of money and then he, I don't know, cured some disease in the world. Was it worth it? By the EA calculus, it would have been. But I think by most calculus, it would not have been. In fact, what's his name? McCaskill, the great guru of EA, actually tweeted, oh no, but by the way, we need virtue ethics. Well, what virtues are you talking about, bro? They're not in the fucking spreadsheet. Why do I care about them, right? That's the fundamental problem, right? That's why utilitarianism, unguided by deontology meaning a more rules-based system, is basically insane, right? And that's in a short version of my screen.
Well, it's fascinating that like I sort of arrived at that like very early in my life, perhaps in my early 20s, where I thought a little bit about utilitarianism, and it was like this doesn't make sense. Like you arrive at all these repugnant conclusions. And yeah, I mean, there's some amount of utilitarianism as being outcomes oriented is good. Yeah, you want to be outcomes oriented, but you also want to have some rules. You want to have some principles. You want to have, uh, you want to be virtuous. You can't always predict what could go wrong and what go well. So you want to rely on um, virtues to be able to guide you in life, so that even if the outcome is not perfect, you can at least say I was principled, and you try to do the best thing possible. And this is like an age old thing that people arrived at. And so I think a lot of the tinkering. What's really interesting is like these people are saying that if we don't listen to them, the world is going to end. Basically, right? If we don't listen to what they're saying, the world's going to end. I actually think that if we listen to them, the world is going to end, because I think utilitarianism, in the same way that they're arguing that unaligned AI could end the world, unaligned utilitarianism could end the world, because they some error in their spreadsheet and will actually just cause massive damage, or some error in their prediction of the consequences, because you don't have complete information, right? And I'm sure there's a blog post somewhere on their like talking about how this argument or whatever, but ultimately, like the totality of utilitarianism will result in massive damage. SBF is just like the tip of the iceberg. You can justify anything with pure utilitarianism. You can just literally justify anything, especially if you have a potential for infinite utility or infinite disutility, or like, if humanity goes to zero, that's really bad, right? Because not only you are killing a lot of people, causing a lot of disutility, the opportunity cost of infinite utility in the future, because you can invent utopia. If you align, so it's like if you align AGI, it's infinite positive utility. If you disalign AGI, it's infinite negative utility. And in a scenario like this, you end up being fairly irrational, because you can't discount infinity. So you want to apply some discounting on probabilities or some future event, but any discount you apply to infinity, you're still with infinity. So this is a problem called Pascal's mugging. So Pascal, we all know Pascal's wager, right? It doesn't cost you much to believe in God. Therefore, you should believe in God on the off chance that God actually exists, right? But there is another thing where if you apply this argument uniformly, let's say someone came to you on the street and said, I am God, give me all your money, all your burn in hell. Any rational being would not assign value percentage that is zero to this person being God. You can never be zero. That's basic Bayesianism. So you assign it 0.000000001% that this person is God. But 0.00001% of infinity, because that's infinite disutility or infinite utility, it's still infinity. So the rational thing to do there is to give that person all your money and ask for forgiveness, because they're potentially going to cause you infinite amount of harm. So any situation you set up where there's infinity, you end up Pascal mugged. And I think a lot of these people are Pascal mugged.
And we are, whether it's climate, whether it's COVID, we are so sensitive to existential arguments that we go along with
But
it.
it's, I feel like it's all just, these are luxury belief systems living in the American empire where you don't deal, you're not in Ukraine dealing with a real war or any version of reality. Like you get to fight on Twitter all day about like kind of like your belief system. And I just, it's like gut bacteria. Like it can exist inside the like kind of nice confines of a well-fed human, but as soon as you get out of that, it just dies. Like, are there any cultures at any scale around the world that are even close to this type of belief system? Like you go to China, is like EA like a thing?
Well, because they're not Christian. This is all Christian residue at the end of the day. That's why when Christian societies get into a social panic, note when Trump gets elected in November 2016, what do they whip up? A millenarian fervor in which the world is ending. There's some great Christ figure, and we must either repent and be saved. That is a reflex to every great crisis, and this is the same Christian mythos, but just cast with Yud of all people instead of Jesus. I mean, it really is like that. But that's the point. Does this happen in post-Christian societies? No, it doesn't. Right? That's the point. That's the moral narrative of our society, and you see it again and again and again and again. I know I say this again, but
It's like the goldfish
Right.
parable. It's like the goldfish parable.
Exactly.
It's like, hey boys, how's the
Right.
water? And it's like, what the hell is water? It's like this is all fucking water, and it's just another version
And
of it.
then the objection to this, like the anti-woke, the neo-reactionary, the new right, all these fuckers online, they all devolve into the Nietzschean protests of Christianity. It's all paganism, the strong man, BAP, all that bullshit. It's all the same garbage. But none of them actually live that pagan reality. And even if they did, it always ends in despotism and horror. I mean, look at the Holocaust, for God's sake. I mean, that's the reality. It's like overweening Christianity that goes off the rails, and then like the pagan revolt. And that's it. That's the story. Maybe you should just stop.
All fought on
Right.
Twitter. Everything
Yeah.
fought on Twitter.
What's
I have
BAP,
no idea.
Antonio?
It's an ad tech term that refers to a business model inside media, is what it is. Maybe we should just.
Eric, why don't you define it for
Yeah.
our audience since you flagged it?
BAP is I've heard according to the kids stands for Bronze Age Pervert, which is a pseudonym of a PhD of a Yale philosopher PhD graduate who was a Nietzsche scholar and has written a very popular book among the new right called Bronze Age Mindset, which is kind of very impressionistic. If you read it, you will feel like it's written in a different era, like hundreds of years ago, and it's very subversive, and it has inspired a generation of young men, in particular, or new right men, who see in BAP a kind of vitality that does not exist.
Dude, you're
in
definitely
the modern
pumping the
world.
guy. I gotta say,
How would you edit
you're definitely selling this dude. Okay, I mean, yeah.
Well, I'm trying to be objective about it. He also is racist and sexist. So I don't. Is that enough disclaimers? How would you characterize?
I don't know. I find the whole like post-liberal right. It's like, like the argument might be a lot stronger if you yourself are not actually a fucking soy boy living on like the Upper East Side of New York or Palm Beach or whatever. Like if you're at Bronze Age mindset, great, go live the fucking Bronze Age lifestyle and then write back to me, right? Like they're not living it. It's completely a fucking LARP, but whatever. Yeah. We're probably going to get hate mail now from the BAP fans, but
It just begs the question, like, what to do if you're not going to be Christian. And you're not gonna be
I have a solution.
Like,
just stop
Right,
reading the
what do you-
Bible until you get right before the Gospels. Just don't read the New Testament. Just stop right there at the end of the Old Testament. That's my solution. The middle ground.
but Jews are trying to keep people out, or it's so hard to
Wow.
become a Jew.
No comment. Speaking of which, can I
In
just
Miami?
plug? I'm finally finalizing it. The mikvah, the dunk, the ritual, the circumcision, the whole business is finally happening April 26th. You'll find this funny. No. In Austin, I'm timing it with a crypto conference consensus. I'm going to go hang out with the crypto bros, and then we're going to get a little prick. There'll be a little blood, a little bit mikvah, a little Judaism, and boom, we're killing two very different birds with the same stone. April 26th in Austin, Texas.
Let's get this on camera. We should film Moment of Zen.
Including the circumcision.
By the way, so this is, well, let's not go into too many details. Some people do it themselves. The really metal way of doing it is doing it yourself.
Oh, God.
Please,
Jesus Christ.
let's move to a new topic.
Everyone just cringes at once. I'll report back to our Moment of Zen listeners.
Can I ask a question? Why do we think EA is so popular in Silicon Valley? Maybe that's a mid question, but I think maybe for the audience, it would be a good attempt at, like, why is Dustin Moskovitz and Sam Bankman-Fried and all these folks in Silicon Valley? Because it feels like it's centered in the Bay Area more than anywhere else, right?
I mean, look, there are positive aspects, and maybe that's what like Moskovitz was initially interested in. Is they actually built a site that shows you the best, the most effective nonprofits to donate to, which is like a good thing. Like you could stop there and could have done the world a very positive thing, right? And it is compelling to, say that we can run some numbers and be able to use money in a very effective way. And of course, startup founders and people who are interested in doing good and in not actually wasting money and spending it on corruption, because a lot of nonprofits are corruption, got attracted to this idea. But then it sort of becomes a slippery slope, because the reason they arrived at these ideas is because of their utilitarian ideology. And then you start reading about utilitarianism and how they do it. And I think for a lot of people that are technical, tech-oriented, will be convinced that they found the solution to ethics, which is a very sort of interesting claim, and a thing that will be like, very interesting for people. Like to tell someone that I found the solution for ethics, and you don't have to have these ethical dilemmas anytime you try to do something right. You can just, calculate it. It's actually like a very, very interesting thing. But also you add in the community, you add in the potential mating pool that you can have access to, especially if you're, like we said, disenfranchised and typically don't have access to a mating pool. The friendship, all of that stuff, and people will just buy in it completely.
Yeah, it's attractive because it's a high IQ nerd trap of like, how do you make the biggest difference in the world, right? How do you make the biggest impact? And then also it's, you get to show how good of a person you are too. And so it attracts men and women. To Amjad's point, the steelman of EA is that most of philanthropy is totally emotionally driven or special interest driven or corrupt. And EA has introduced frameworks to how to be systematic about philanthropy in the same way that we're systematic about allocating capital into startups, for example.
Oh, here's my criticism of EA. They're actually not mathematical, right? They're not deriving moral conclusion from math. They're wrapping math around moral conclusions. Again, I'm almost not criticizing EA people for being EA people. I'm saying they're not being EA maxy enough. Like, if they really are EA people, then fine, fucking, cut apart the fucking newborn and harvest their organs. I don't know, create the snuff film that actually pleases billions of people but costs the life of one person. Do the goddamn math already, right? If you're really going to do it, do it. None of them actually do it, right? Is the reality of it. And it's it's shocking how the math always works out to actually support the average midwit liberal Democrats' views. Like, what has come out of EA that is like, oh my God, moral shocker, we couldn't have seen this coming from secular liberalism, right? Somehow the math always works out to support what is pretty normie, like mid techno-libertarian, like Democratic Party beliefs. It's amazing how the math just works out that way, right? That's why it's not actually very bright or interesting or quantitative or anything, in my opinion.
Well, because EA is not very disagreeable.
I think it's disagreeable. So it's not. It doesn't really go there, right? Like if you're really an EA maxi, you'd go to places that they obviously don't go, right?
What has been the biggest accomplishment from EA outside of the website that rates charities?
Spreading veganism, perhaps, because one of the founders of EA is this. No, I'm not joking. Is this Australian guy who wrote a book about veganism?
Peter Singer?
I forgot his name. He's like
Peter Singer?
What's that?
The Australian philosopher. Yeah, okay.
Peter Singer, yeah.
Who, by the way, just well,
yeah. So
Yeah.
he's one of the founders.
but just to be clear,
Yeah.
his notion of moral dignity is kind of based on IQ, and his supposition was that a sufficiently, mentally disabled human should be rated less than non-humans potentially, right? And I think that
Yeah, he'll probably get canceled by them pretty soon because Bostrom got canceled. Let's actually talk about that. Eric, he posted the Richard Hanania's article about how wokeism is eating EA inside out. What was the main arguments there?
Hold on. Let me put it up really quick.
So what's wild to me is how much coverage it gets relative. I mean, an SBF notwithstanding, like what have they actually done?
Well, so let me tell you why. Yeah. Let me tell you their impact, and maybe we can get back to the Richard blog. But they're actually very important now. They're super important because, Sam Altman recently tweeted is a lot of us got into AI by reading Eliezer Yudkowski. So the people that are working on AI across the biggest labs, OpenAI and Anthropic and all these people, got into AI inspired by sort of effective altruist literature. And a lot of these people are in big positions in a lot of AI companies now. And actually, a lot of EA groups were recommending people to go work at these labs. Of course, now Eliezer Yudkowski has been speaking up against OpenAI and others because they're not following his recommendations. But in essence, the EA movement was a recruiting arm of big tech AI for a long time. And a lot of them got off the sort of militant AI safetyism view. And they got convinced that actually we can build AI while also making sure it's positive for humanity. But a lot of and making a bunch of money. Exactly. I mean, that also makes a big difference because a lot of those people got into big companies and started making a lot of money. And then when you make a lot of money, you don't need to be part of a loser group. But they're still super influential. Like they're now like trying to influence how AI develops. So they're promoting now ideas on how to restrict chip manufacturing in AI and how to regulate chip manufacturing and how to regulate like GPUs and all of that. They're really trying to centralize the development of AI into the hands of the few so that they can control it to make it safe for everyone. And if they're successful, they're going to invite a lot of AI regulation. Governments love to find a fringe group with some scribbles that some people like, and then if it benefits government and increased centralization, they'll actually adopt it. So, it's not out of the question that someone like Eliezer will be employed by the government in the future to ensure the safety of AI and perhaps given a lot of money and a lot of power. And so now when AI is going to disrupt big parts of our world and the government starts waking up to this, these people will become more and more influential. And that's why it's important to pay attention to them. And the important thing is to continue to build and develop and make the world better and accelerate technology. And yes, you want to pay attention to to some form of alignment, although I hate this word, but some form of making sure that we understand the technology that we're building and how it's going to affect us. But you should not centralize, you should not block, you should not overregulate. It's too early to regulate anything in AI or software in general. And it's just going to make it go somewhere else, like China or Russia.
Do you have any more on that? Like, for people who are like, yeah, but how do we actually align or think about alignment? Is there more you would say of like, if you were the head of trying to align or, guide all the alignment researchers, like what should they actually focus on?
There are people that are offshoots of the core militant group that are actually fairly reasonable. There's a guy called Paul Cristiano, I think that seems like a reasonable guy. A lot of people at OpenAI's team are probably reasonable on this stuff. And so there are reasonable people that care about this. And look, I think even the militant group will continue to produce good intellectual output, but they're really unaligned. Someone needs to align them. And I think that there's a risk for them to become rogue, just because they're the problem of infinity, the problem of Pascal's mugging, right? It's easy for them to really justify abhorrent actions. So I think if someone wants to learn about alignment in a reasonable way, you can actually just read research. Anthropic is putting out really interesting research on they wrote this article called on constitutional AI, where it's a really neat trick where you give the AI like a constitution, and then you have another AI that's like rating its execution on that constitution, and then that rating feeds into its training, and so it becomes increasingly more aligned with the constitution that you wrote for it.
So we were talking about how new atheism evolved into social justice. What happened was that there was a camp, new atheism started pretty alpha, right? Like you look at Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, like these were not woke people. But what happened was that there was a core within atheism called Atheism Plus that was like, hey, we're going to have no God, but we're going to be anti-religion, but we need to be pro something. And that Atheism Plus morphed into social justice. Similarly, effective altruism, you think people like Yud, people like Robin Hanson, these are not woke people. And yet now when people talk about alignment, a lot of them are actually talking about wokeness or AI safety. Like a lot of talk. And so how do these movements get kind of, become woke? And there's this is what Richard's post is on, is the idea that EA is at a fork in the road moment. They have to pick. You can either be woke or anti-woke. And EA has been trying to be in between, but you can't. And there's this law called Robert Conquest's second law, which says that every organization will either be explicitly right-wing or it will turn into a left-wing one, or vice versa works. Basically, the reason why...
What's that law?
Basically, the reason why you can't go centrist is because if you go centrist, you have a choice. Woke people are going to come to your organization and they're going to try to, encourage, like, make you live by woke principles. And if you accept them, then you're woke. And if you reject them, then you're anti-woke. And so you could try to stay centrist, maybe in your own mind, but in terms of your organization, it's either going to be one or the other if it achieves any sort of scale or impact. And he was saying that EA has started to achieve that scale and impact, and is likely going to be part of the Democratic Party unless it takes a very deliberate decision to be against it. And what's interesting is that EA's personality type, in my opinion, is not as disagreeable. And so it is interesting. You notice there are like personality types that are drawn to different types of movements, right? Like we were talking about Bitcoin and Ethereum in a previous podcast, right? Like you can look at a person and see, like, are they more likely to be an Ethereum fan or a Bitcoin fan? Like, and you can look at Scott Aronson or Slate Star Kodak, and the Bitcoin community or the libertarian community is just way more disagreeable, way more aggressive, way more, contrarian by nature. Like you could now Keith Boy is not into crypto, but if he was, he'd be a Bitcoiner, right? Like you could just tell. And so EA happens to draw this kind of more subdued, passive, or not as disagreeable type person.
Do you think there's like an entryism angle here? So entryism is this idea where some communists pretty explicitly would go into groups and turn them communists. So a group that is like has nothing to do with communism would actually like infiltrate some kind of group and start agitating and like turning out communists. And you saw that a lot in Silicon Valley companies where you would have like a fairly functioning company, and then just a few people will just start agitating and creating activism and doing things like that, and really derail the company. There isn't like a central sort of, unlike with communism, where I don't know, Trotsky or something or Lenin would say like, go, enter this group. I don't think there's anyone saying that, but actually, perhaps is there like a concerted effort to enter group by leftists to turn them more left?
I think it's much more organic, much more bottoms up. I think someone once had a post. We'll try to put it here that like it's a strategy to rise up. I mean, it's within an organization and to gain. It's a way to bring people together and elevate your own stature, get more responsibility, be seen as an ally in the organization. So I think it's largely a sort of byproduct of an individual, career optimization short term.
Yeah, I mean, it's like it's another example of the situation of like, how is it that every institution in society ended up with the same narrow set of beliefs? Why would EA be any different at the end of the day? If you believe in the slippery slope argument of increasing dignity and justice for everyone, that like Christianity set into motion and now secular liberalism is continuing, why would EA be any different? Unless they literally dug in their heels per Conquest second law and said, we're going in a different direction, we're doing something else, which they're not going to do. And so they're just going to fall like a domino like every other institution in society. Right. I think that's the Richard argument.
I find it interesting how with modern politics, where basically we always say that whatever threat or whatever thing that would happen, like most of the time we talk about how it is organic and decentralized. But when you read history, it is mostly concerted efforts of certain people to do certain things. Is it true that like modernity is just, there's a lot of just decentralized emergent properties of politics, or we just don't know yet the level of coordination that might be happening?
I don't know. The protocols of the elders of woke, they gather together in underground room.
Well, it is interesting. I think there is a bottoms up phenomenon, but there's also support from I don't mean in a like secretive. I think they're open about it.
I don't know. I think like biology's actually talked a little bit about this. If you actually go look at the literature, especially from the 60s, you have what is like Saul Alinsky and like rules for radicals, and there's actually a whole playbook of community organizing and kind of like, this is how you actually go do it. And to your point, Amjad, like there's actually a pretty long history in the U.S. of basically more or less some version of the American Communist Party in different versions at the student level, at the kind of labor union oriented level, and you can actually trace that all the way back to abolitionists. Like there's like a continuous line between abolitionists and kind of like, I don't know, Barack Obama community organizing in Chicago. But as it relates to EA, are they at a fork in the road? Like, I mean, they're already part of the Democratic Party, right? Like FTX and Dustin Moskovitz spent a ton of money. Like who's a right-wing person within the EA movement? Is that even a thing?
Richard Hanania.
I think Robin Hanson.
Yeah. Well, Richard is doing wishful thinking.
So is Richard self-identify as EA, or is he saying
he self-identifies as a right-wing rationalist? And we should have him on this podcast and talk about it. But that is kind of a movement that he's hoping to help support.
But would people in EA, like the people who, you know, kind of are very much identified with EA, would they think Richard is part of their group?
No.
So basically he's borrowing from some ideas, but he's created a completely different belief set. It's not like he was part of it and then is now split off.
I think people would say that you know, he's not that different from Robin Hanson, who is EA.
But is Robin Hanson in like the core EA group, or is he again a little bit off on the side? Because I think of Robin Hanson as an extremely disagreeable person just from his internet personality.
I don't think if he ever has like made it publicly clear that he's part of Effective Altruism. Oh, sorry, I went dark here.
Looks like you're going to tell us a ghost story. Ghost Writer, there you go. Replit, you know, pitch. That's our bingo card.
Yeah, we have to pitch Replit every time Amjad's on to make it worth his time. Use Replit. Do bounties.
I don't think Robin Hanson ever sort of made that clear, but I think it's sort of like there's like a cluster of different groups. There's the sort of libertarian-ish, Brian Kaplan, Robin Hanson, all these people were, would go to these rationalist blogs and would argue with them and would go into debates with them. But I don't think you're right. I don't think he is one of those groups. So perhaps actually there isn't a right-wing rationalist or EA.
Well, I will say one note I just want to say is Brian Kaplan's latest book is called "Don't Be a Feminist," and he doesn't seem to be canceled for it. Like it feels like that, of course, is outside of the Overton window, a few years ago, but it's kind of, I think, just ignored.
Yeah, but it's like all the Mercatus Center guys are just they're already out there. They're funded by the Kochs. Like they've already kind of been canceled by association. Tyler's the only one who can kind of seem to sprinkle across the.
Also, Brian Kaplan's like
from there, but
he's like the Marilyn Manson of the right. Like he's always trying to get canceled. He's trying to get more and more outrageous. Right? Like who knows what the next book's going to be? But like he's basically
yeah. Maybe Eric, maybe explain the Mercatus Center for people who don't know, because I think it's important.
I actually don't know how to explain the Mercatus Center. It's an outgrowth of GMU. It's like an independent research organization with GMU economists
funded by the Kochs.
Right.
Like they specifically wanted to create a prestige right-wing academic institution, and Tyler Cowen and a whole bunch of other folks, Robin Hanson,
Brian Kaplan, Arnold
but like Jerry Brito in the crypto world, like there are some like really, really talented people who have been associated with it. But I don't think it's taken credibly by the cathedral. Like,
well,
they're like popular in the blogosphere, right? It's like Tyler has the term state capacity. People use it, like Ezra Klein, Noah Smith, who was on the podcast last week. We'll talk about it and entertain, but like, there's no impact at the kind of mainstream policy level or anything like that. At least in my point of view, and I'm a marginal revolution. I read Tyler's blog every day. It's like for the last 15 years.
One thing that's interesting, I just was talking to Joe Lonsdale, and Joe Lonsdale's new bit is that too many people focus on culture and not enough on governance. And he thinks that the way to fight wokeness is not on Twitter, but in via changing institutions, just introducing more accountability, more effective. There's a broad question: is politics downstream from culture, or vice versa? And it's I'm curious if folks here have an opinion. Some people think
that seems obviously wrong.
Yeah,
I mean,
Joe's a smart guy, but like, what institution are you going to change with
University of Austin,
better governance?
Which he backed, for example. I mean, that's the thing, right? He's actually trying to create new institutions that are more centrist or whatever. That's his deal.
Right, well, but a new institution, you can work on that. You can't reform the existing institution.
So the other thing is that's basically what the non-left, let's say the non-woke or the center, anyone to the right of extreme left has been trying to do for a really long time. And you have to remember that the reason politics is downstream from culture became sort of such a big meme is because Breitbart said it like before he died, who started the Breitbart magazine, and it created a bit of a revolution in sort of right wing politics, because for the first time, people on the right started paying attention to the culture wars, because they've been losing the culture wars for so long. And they're starting to win. Like, I mean, the Trump was a big win for them. The Supreme Court is a huge win. Like what happened with Roe v. Wade is a huge win for them. And Chris Rufo and those gang and libs of TikTok and all these people are starting to gain some wins. So I actually think that if they want to win some more, I'm not saying everything they do is actually, I agree with them, more centrist and moderate, but I think that it's been extremely effective for the right to take a culture view of politics.
It's going to be interesting to see if so tech has famously left. We had Noah Smith on the podcast last week, and he said that tech is getting less progressive. But the real question is there going to be a tech sphere that supports whatever right-wing candidate, whether it's DeSantis? It certainly won't be Trump.
Impossible.
No.
Impossible.
So I slightly disagree in the sense that I don't think you can have. Let me pause. I actually lost my train of thought, so we got that.
You disagree with the sort of culture comment, culture politics?
Yeah, let me say. So I disagree on the cultural stuff because I don't think that fundamentally changes the structure of society to get like some critical race theory school board law passed. And I don't think libs of TikTok or whatever kind of win on Twitter is actually changing the culture, because I think it approaches it from like a zero sum, like we have to fight over what's here. And not to kind of like be a Mark stand with build, but I think this idea, and to be fair, like there are some on the left who actually are talking about this idea of abundance mentality, but like I feel like the city on a shining hill is what like anybody should be trying to pitch, is like, what is the better alternative, rather than we need to like help this crumbling society and fight over the ruins of the empire. It's like, no, what are we actually building that's new that people are excited about? And I don't know, maybe I sound naive and stupid, but like that's why I always get excited about like something like SpaceX, because it's like actually trying to push things forward in a way that, I don't know, seems like we should be trying to
So I don't disagree.
On another planet or whatever.
I don't disagree, but the comment was more they've become more effective than they have been for the past 40 years, right? And like libs of TikTok does make huge impact. Like it freaked out parents in Florida, and they went and they passed something against CRT. Like they're actually getting things done, not just on Twitter, but they're changing the culture somehow, and it's resulting in some policy changes. And they're actually like, I think Elon would not have bought Twitter if he was not starting to get exposed to these ideas, and is just starting to realize like how tilted, how much there's thumb on the scale, as he put it. And so you end up moving a lot of very powerful people that end up sort of changing things, which is like why I was saying it's important to pay attention to the rationalist community, because they have the ear of a lot of powerful people, including SBF, late SBF, but a bunch of founders that like made billions of dollars are like pouring a ton of money there, and they're listening to them. Actually, they almost infiltrated Elon's circle. And there was a story in the Wall Street Journal about someone from EA getting into Elon's inner circle, and he almost got Elon to donate $6 billion to like some EA cause. And then at some point, Elon just, and they did interviews with people close to Elon saying that how that person or that group really tried to influence Elon, and he was captivated by it for a little bit. And that's my comment also on sort of like entryism as well, because I think they're going to start doing these tactics of sort of entryism and all that things. But they're successful because they're also fighting a sort of a cultural war where they're producing media, blog posts, videos, tweets, and things like that. So I think that's really the arena. And if you're not in the arena, you're no one. Nobody will listen to you. You can go build whatever fucking university you want to build. Nobody cares about University of Austin.
But
I've never heard of it.
Right, but I would argue that nobody cares about what happens in Florida either, right? Like the victories you're citing are actually not cultural victories; they're electoral victories in red states, right? So there, I agree. There's been some progress, but do you think among elite institutions there's been a cultural change to the right recently?
I don't think so, but the biggest win, the most elite institution in the country is the Supreme Court, which is, there's been a huge shift to the right, not by changing opinions, but by actually putting people in that place.
I'm a cynical. I don't think the woke tide is ultimately going to recede. I mean, it does seem like the New York Times, for example, issued a piece on J.K. Rowling and the trans thing that was like a missive from like Pravda during the Soviet, like, oh, this is the new party line from the Comintern as to what we have to say. So, but
well, I'm not saying they're fully winning. I'm just saying they're winning more than 2010,
or more than 2020.
Well, but
right?
just
more than
Yeah, but if you're already in last place and now you want to like a 10-game winning streak, you're still like third to last place.
10% week over week.
So what is the next Pareto optimal jump that they can make?
Vivek Ramaswamy for president.
No. I think like you need to have like a better alternative. Like you need to be pitching people on like this, buy this. Like this is the life you actually want, not fighting over whatever we have now and the problems we have now. It's got to be, I think, a pretty radical shift, right? It's like we have fentanyl in this country. We're going to have a zero tolerance policy for fentanyl, and any country that is supplying us with fentanyl, we are going to we're going to declare war on.
That was Tom Clancy's last good novel, by the way.
That level
Danger, in which he declared war on the cartels. Yeah.
Right, but like we're fighting over all these like issues that don't matter, and then there are people strung out on the streets of San Francisco overdosing, more deaths from fentanyl than COVID. Like, who's actually taking that stuff seriously? Instead, it just feels like everyone's fighting over like these meaningless, Twitter battles.
Well, that's what Joe's saying, by the way. He's trying to address, homelessness. He's trying to.
Right. Joe moved to Texas, though. Joe didn't stay in San Francisco to win there. And I admire the fact that he's building a new institution. And I think he's super involved in trying to change things in Texas. So like, it's not the effort that I'm pushing on. It's like we're giving up on basically the greatest source of economic growth in the United States. I don't know how long, right? On California, because like, the supervisors in San Francisco are really entrenched and they can win. It's like, why isn't there like a groundswell of people selling something different?
So Gary Tan, the current president of YC, made a huge difference in San Francisco politics, mostly fighting on Twitter. Started with Twitter.
Right.
But put real funds and did real organizing. Yeah. Look, you're talking to a guy building a Twitter. I know it's important, but like my point is like, why don't we have 100 more Garys?
Because nobody cares.
Like, because he's probably post-economic. He doesn't care about getting canceled. He has like a will standing in the sort of Silicon Valley community. He has a story that is compelling. He'd be a poor immigrant. Pull himself off the bootstraps, and like the sample size at that point is like very.
Well, no, hold on. I mean, that's not true. Small. You've described literally every Silicon Valley billionaire. I mean, or every Silicon Valley influential person is post-economic, is probably the son of an immigrant, and X, Y, and Z. Like, I'm not.
Is that also you? Like,
But
I'm
right,
not a
like
billionaire yet.
I'm not
Fine,
going to let the techies off so easy.
Next week.
I agree with Dan. They're like, I think I've probably said this before. How the fuck is it that the scene of the biggest legal wealth creation in human history, right, is run in elections that are lost by 10,000 votes, whose campaign budgets are $50,000, right? Like nothing. Like at some point, it's on techies. So like, fuck you. Like, guess what? Petroleum executives don't get treated this way in Houston. Wall Street executives don't get treated this way in New York. If you're being kicked around like a little bitch by incompetence, then something is wrong with you, and you should have done something about it. And it's great that Gary is doing it, but I think techies haven't done that. Why? It's because it would require the full ugliness of human society, of kissing babies, of shaking hands, of pressing the flesh, of presenting a pitch that appeals to more than a very limited set of nerds. All these things that nobody is willing to do. The other thing I would willing to say,
Yeah, ethics by Excel spreadsheet.
right? Right.
Well, what about money? Like you bring up a good point. Why aren't the center right billionaires like pouring
David
a lot
Sachs
of
is a
money
little
into
bit. I think that's been
politics?
public that he's funded some of these efforts a little bit.
Yeah.
I think the other thing, by the way, and I think this is important, Lonsdale had an essay recently about rebuilding the frontier society, right? And for those who aren't familiar with the frontier, there was, I forget the name of the writer, The Frontier in the American Psyche was a famous essay about 19th century America, in which the notion of there being a frontier was key to the American sort of self-conception. And at some point in the 60s, we said the frontier is over. We're not a frontier society anymore. We worry about AI safety. Can you imagine worrying about frontier safety, right? In the 1860s, they would have laughed in your face. It's like, get on that damn, prairie schooner, and if your kids die in the way, you bury them and off you go to California, right? We became different as a society, right? And I think part of the problem with techies is they're very good at operating at frontiers. They're not very good at maintaining or fixing things, right? I think that's broadly true in the United States, by the way. And I think part of the bingo card is me also pumping Europe, right? So here's where I'm pumping Europe. They're much better at maintaining things, right? And the US isn't very good at maintaining or fixing things. It's good at building new stuff and operating at the frontiers. And it just so happens that that's it. Like the front, like the end of the Pacific is 3 miles away from where I'm sitting right now. We've gotten to the end of the frontier and we haven't created a new one. Dan said he was excited by SpaceX. You've created a new frontier, which is space exploration. But unfortunately, it doesn't appeal to that many people and it's super fucking expensive. So how do we recreate that frontier society other than in software, which is inspiring to a few? I don't know, but I think that's the fundamental problem. Or Americans have to get a lot better at maintaining things.
But I don't know if most of the deserts in the United States are uninhabited. Like most of the United States is uninhabited. Yeah, they're not net new land, but like there's like a lot of places that you can just start building up.
But you don't.
And
there's a Mediterranean weather monopoly. Yeah. It's a blue state. So if you split California into multiple states and add some economic competition, I actually think you'd get a bunch of stuff. So Tim Draper's idea of splitting it into 12, maybe why don't we just start with 2? But the other thing is like, just think of like Richard Daley, right? Just like imagine him looking at how San Francisco is run and just kind of like looking at this being like, oh, holy shit. Like, no, there should be a person who's running that city essentially like a business. And if, whatever, graft, corruption, all that stuff that was associated with, Boss Tweed, but you can't argue that those cities during those periods were much better run in terms of like, okay, like this is actually going to get done. Instead, it's like captured by this just terrible bureaucracy of NIMBYism and all this other bullshit. And so like, I think that there has to be some version of alternative. It's just like competence. And like, I still don't understand why we don't have more people trying to do that.
Shall we end on that mystery?
Sounds good.
Amjad, always a pleasure. Thank you for joining us on Moment of Zen.
Yeah, that was really fun.
By the way, genius idea before I forget, Eric, Vivek as a guest. You can score him. We're in a signal chat. Vivek as a guest.
Yeah.
We should get Gary Tan too. I actually think that was a great suggestion, Amjad. Yeah. Because I think we should be talking about him, like his vision for San Francisco and telling his story a little bit more.
Definitely.
He'd be better.
I mean, he's also the president of YC. It's a good guest to get.
SecureFrame is the leading all-in-one platform for security and privacy compliance. SecureFrame helps you get SOC 2 audit ready in weeks, not months, and it's used by thousands of companies like AngelList, Coda, and Remote. I believe in the company so much I invested in it, and I recommend it to all my portfolio companies. Sign up for a free demo at secureframe.com and mention Moment of Zen during your demo to get 20% off your first year of SecureFrame.